Sergeant Jenna Briggs limped into the trauma bay of Base Grizzle 19 like a walking court-martial, clutching a half-unwrapped snack bar in one hand and most of her shredded leg in the other. The auto doors hissed open and immediately tried to close again, as if rejecting whatever biohazard she represented. Blood dripped freely, splattering across the pristine silver floors of the Taxari Collective's most advanced field hospital, though pristine was generous considering it was held together with alien zip ties and false hope. Six-armed, Dr. Zira Noor dropped her clipboard mid-diagnostic and froze in abject horror. The human before her was smiling, grinning even. "Heya, Doc," Briggs said, voice chipper like she was ordering coffee instead of actively hemorrhaging. "Got any duct tape? Lefty here's trying to escape." She gestured with her remaining foot toward her mostly severed thigh, where the femur stuck out at an angle that made Zira's inner membranes quiver. One of the Gorlaxian assistants gasped and floated backward into a wall panel. "Subject presents." With full femoral exposure and an apparent emotional detachment from self-preservation, Zira mumbled, snapping into action with a tremble in her voice and a scalpel in her upper left hand. "Please lie down immediately, cease speech, and why are you eating during triage?" Jenna blinked. "Protein bar, recovery fuel. Don't worry, it's low carb." She took another bite, winced slightly, and added, "Just don't hit the nerve cluster, Doc. Makes me giggle like a drunk ferret." Zira tried to sedate her, but every attempt was met with more resistance than the outer hull of a dreadnought. The injection port. "Nah, I'm good." Oxygen mask. "Only if you've got the grape flavor." By the time Zira actually reached the leg with her tools, Briggs had already yanked a scalpel from a nearby tray, popped the emergency cauterizer, and was halfway through performing a textbook battlefield ligation on herself while humming something that sounded suspiciously like Sweet Home Alabama. "Stop. Stop that immediately," Zira cried, nearly colliding with a ceiling-mounted diagnostic drone. "You are not licensed. You are not clean. You are not sane." "You should see me on a Friday," Jenna muttered through gritted teeth, holding her leg stump aloft like a prize catch. A puff of steam rose as she seared it shut with a hiss that echoed off the walls. Zira tried to breathe, forgot she didn't have lungs in the human sense, and let out a wheezing whistle through her neck spiracles. Then Private Gomez stumbled in, bleeding from the neck and smiling like he'd won a lottery. "Doc, I need a hand. Mine's still holding the rifle, but my shoulder kinda clocked out." "Take a seat," Jenna called, still sitting upright on her gurney. "You're next after I fix Lefty here." "Cool," Gomez replied, blood dripping down his eye. "Well, you want the gauze or the chewing gum?" Zira screamed. Internally. Externally, she issued a burst of high-frequency taxari to all nearby medical staff that roughly translated to, "This species is actively defying the principles of anatomy, and I demand an intergalactic ethics review. Immediately." The chaos didn't end. Lieutenant Bash, the enormous Ursan warrior from the Southern Front, was dragged in on a hover gurney, unconscious and steaming. Half his fur was scorched, one arm was limp, and his internal temperature was approaching spontaneous soup. Jenna poked him with a broken stim injector. "You gonna nap through the party, furball?" To everyone's horror, Bash blinked awake, stared blearily at Jenna, and rasped, "Why? Is the human in charge of triage?" No one had an answer, especially not Dr. Zira, whose career was now unraveling faster than the stitches Jenna was applying to herself while quoting Clint Eastwood. The medbay looked like a horror film directed by a slapstick comedian. Blood trails, misused tools, morphine swapped with instant coffee packs, and human soldiers inventing new medical procedures based entirely on vibes. Zira tried to restore order. She raised all 6 arms, summoned every ounce of her cultural superiority, and announced, "From this moment forward, no more unauthorized surgery, no more sarcasm, and no more treating limb loss like a minor inconvenience." Silence followed. Then Gomez raised a finger. "What about partial inconvenience?" Jenna cackled so hard she reopened her wound. Zira had never wished for a crowbar more in her life, not to use as a weapon, but as an anesthetic, for herself. The war outside was one thing, but in here, this was a battlefield of logic versus lunacy, and the humans had already taken the high ground, with duct tape, chewing gum, and a complete disregard for mortality. Dr. Zira Noor had once completed a 72-hour emergency surgery on a collapsed Vorian spinal stack using only microplasma forceps, a spoon, and one caffeine suppository, but nothing had prepared her for watching a human Navy SEAL flirt while operating on herself. Sergeant Jenna Briggs, propped up like a smug war monument, was currently using a stolen laser scalpel and a rearview mirror to adjust the angle on her fresh cauterization, all while batting her lashes at a confused Gorlaxian orderly who had never once been flirted with and was now leaking luminescent nervous fluid from 3 eye stalks. "Come on, Jellybean," she said, giving him a wink that should have been a war crime. "How about a little help wrapping this up? I've only got 4 fingers on this hand, and none of them went to medical school." The Gorlaxian, whose entire species reproduced via consensus meetings, began trembling violently and floated away to file a sexual harassment complaint that would take 6 weeks to process. Meanwhile, Dr. Zira was performing a deep breathing, technique she hadn't used since her academy dissertation on surgical ethics had been set on fire by a Torg ambassador's celebratory plasma sneeze. All around her, the trauma bay had transformed into a human zoo of meat-based optimism and grim laughter. Private Gomez was in the corner, tightening his own splint, using a combat boot lace, and what looked suspiciously like the elastic waistband from a Gorlaxian surgical gown. Another human, a corporal named Deeks, lay on a gurney missing half his armor and most of his ear, grinning like a lunatic while trying to high-five a shocked intern with his non-existent hand. "It's cool, Doc," he said cheerfully. "I've got a spare on the other side." Zira's internal stress chemicals reached critical saturation, causing a mild shimmer in her cranial fins. She pivoted sharply and grabbed the only object that gave her comfort, her clipboard. It was cracked, likely by Jenna, possibly out of spite. Then came the worst part, the lecture. "You see, Zira," Jenna began, reclining like a smug mythology, "the human body is 70% water, 20% sarcasm, 5% grudge, and 5% bad decisions. You try to fix that with rules and protocol, you're going to need backup. This is a sterile environment," Zira snapped, desperately sanitizing the air with a handheld purger. "Sterile? Girl, half the guys in here probably bathed in engine coolant this morning." Jenna reached over and grabbed a packet of coagulant foam, which she promptly bit open with her teeth like a barbarian unwrapping candy. "Also, your pain meds suck. They made my hallucinations slower." Zira tried to argue but was interrupted by a loud crashing sound as Commander Trix Halden stormed into the ward. Blood streamed from a plasma graze across her shoulder. Her helmet was cracked in half like a dropped egg, and she had that expression humans wore when they were seconds away from either passing out or giving a TED Talk. "Medical report. I'm upright," she said flatly, tossing her helmet onto a bedpan. "Triage status, conscious and cranky. Also, the east wall collapsed, but we've duct-taped a refrigerator to the breach. It's holding for now." Zira nearly dropped her 3rd syringe. "You sealed a structural breach with an appliance?" "It was a double-door unit. Had to break off the freezer compartment to fit," Halden replied, already rolling up her sleeve. "Gomez, patch me up. Doc's hands are shaking again." Gomez, still bleeding from somewhere around his spleen, limped over with a medkit and a casual, "I'm certified in good intentions." Zira could only stare. Her staff, the professionally trained, sterilization-obsessed team of elite Taxari, medics, had begun hiding behind the supply lockers. One of them was actively crying into a vat of nutrient gel. The Gorlaxians had deployed empathy mist, which, instead of calming anyone, made 2 humans start wrestling while quoting ancient Earth cartoons. And then, Just when Zira thought her nervous system might auto-collapse out of sheer evolutionary exhaustion, the base sirens wailed. Proximity alert! Zarnak assault force approaching. Defense perimeter breach imminent. The walls shook as distant impacts echoed through the ground like war drums made of teeth. Jenna stood immediately, wobbling only slightly. Well, Doc, she said, strapping her plasma rifle to her good leg with surgical tape. Looks like recess is over. Zira shrieked. You are not fit for combat. You're barely fit for consciousness. If I'm standing, I'm leading, Jenna said, with a grin. And if I'm not standing, prop me up with something flammable and point me at the bad guys. She whistled, and a handful of equally broken humans hobbled to her side, each one armed with cafeteria trays, duct-taped blasters, and whatever they'd found in the janitorial supply closet. We've got a siege to interrupt and some angry bugs to confuse. As they limped out, Gomez paused beside Zira, smiling brightly despite the fact he was holding in part of his own intestine. Doc, you should come watch. We're going to build the stupidest defense perimeter in galactic history. He offered her a roll of gauze like a handshake. Welcome to the Human Medical Corps. We don't heal. We delay consequences. Zira, in a rare moment of existential acceptance, followed. Partly because she couldn't stop it. Mostly because she wanted to see how far down the rabbit hole went. The sky over base Grizzle 19 cracked with the thunderous shriek of Zarnak artillery, their biological mortars flinging acid sacks the size of hoverbikes across the perimeter like angry pustules with revenge issues. The ground quaked with each blast, but inside the makeshift base-turned-chaotic wartime carnival, Sergeant Jenna Briggs was conducting what could generously be called a defensive strategy meeting, or less generously, an intergalactic improv disaster. All right, squad, she barked, pointing at a half-burned cafeteria table now mounted sideways as a barricade. Table 1 is now Fort Dumbass. Private Gomez, you're commanding that flank. Keep your intestines inside the base this time, yeah? No promises, Gomez replied cheerfully, stuffing medical tubing back into his side while dual-wielding a stapler and a disassembled plasma carbine. Jenna spun on her good leg, because the other one, despite being technically attached, was now held together with alien glue, combat gauze, and what looked suspiciously like spaghetti. Behind her, Commander Trix Halden was dragging a karaoke machine into position. Tell me again how this is supposed to help, Zira shouted from E, the supply hallway, her 6 arms furiously mixing combat stims, illegal nanites, and half a cup of instant ramen. Distraction, Halden said with a smirk. Zarnak don't like high frequencies, and nothing screams high frequency like I will survive, sung off key by a guy with a collapsed lung. From the medbay's remains, now half turned into a weapons depot, human soldiers poured out in bandaged clusters, every one of them bleeding from somewhere and carrying something that absolutely should not be used as a weapon, but definitely would be. A mop handle with laser scalpel tips, a severed drone torso mounted on a chair leg, an alien medical tray retooled into a makeshift shield. The humans moved like a pack of raccoons with military funding, chaotic, brilliant, and too stubborn to die. Jenna leapt onto a supply crate, okay, hobbled and sort of slid, but still managed to look like a commander who knew exactly what the hell was going on. All right, people, she said, raising a fist that was still covered in someone else's blood. This is where we get weird. Zarnak swarm tactics rely on fear, confusion, and overwhelming firepower. Lucky for us, we've got none of those, and a surplus of sheer idiocy. The humans cheered, clanging their makeshift weapons like lunatics on parade. Zira, observing, from the side, muttered into her voice log. Medical log 9371. Humans appear to derive strength from injury, confusion, and poorly understood motivational shouting. Another tremor rocked the base as the first wave hit. Chitinous nightmares. With acid-laced mandibles and tank-sized thoraxes scuttling over the outer ridge. Plasma bolts flew. Acid splattered. Somewhere, the karaoke machine kicked on and began wailing, "Living on a Prayer." Jenna ducked a burst of venom, rolled behind an overturned food cart, and came up blasting with a rifle that had once been part of the infirmary's IV system. She shouted over the din, "Zira, where's our stim cocktail?" Zira, looking like a caffeinated cephalopod, sprinted into view with a tray of vials, each one glowing with questionable legality. "These are unapproved by 17 galactic boards." "Perfect," Jenna said, grabbing 3 and injecting them into her neck like breath mints. Her pupils dilated into portals of war. "Let's show the bugs how humans handle triage under fire." What followed wasn't a battle, it was performance art. Injured humans moved with manic determination, dragging wounded comrades behind. Cover while simultaneously laying down suppressive fire with weapons powered by sheer pettiness. Halden hurled explosive cafeteria trays like discus grenades. Gomez, now missing half a boot and some essential organs, detonated a stolen Zarnak. Bile bomb using only a lighter and a prayer. Jenna led from the front, duct-taped leg flailing, cackling like a banshee, while she vaulted over a barricade and tackled a Zarnak drone with nothing but a scalpel and the will to confuse it to death. And amid it all, Zira was running from one wounded lunatic to another, injecting stims, cauterizing holes, and shouting things like, "That's not where your liver goes," and "Why are you chewing medical foam?" And then came the turning point. The Zarnak breached the secondary wall with a spray of acid and chittering shrieks. But instead of panicking, the humans cheered. Because Jenna, grinning like a war gremlin, with a vengeance kink, had lured them directly into Operation Surprise Dumbass, a trap involving an electrified surgical bed, half a bottle of hand sanitizer, and a rigged karaoke speaker wired to a portable nuke. "Hit the switch, Gomez!" Jenna bellowed. "Make it sing!" Gomez did, and with a detonation that made physics weep, the center of the Zarnak charge exploded in a symphony of light, fire, and terrible music. The shockwave blew half the base, sideways, but when the smoke cleared, the humans were still standing, bleeding, laughing, screaming. One guy was on fire and yelling about toast. Jenna, face smeared in black dust and her leg barely attached, raised her rifle with a grin that belonged on a wanted poster. "Zira!" she howled. "Get the good morphine. I think I'm seeing Jesus and he's doing the Macarena." Zira fell to her knees, dropped her clipboard, and screamed into the sky. "Why are you all still alive?" The humans cheered. Because pain, apparently, was just a punchline. And the war wasn't over yet. The final assault came at dawn, if you could call the sickly green glare of 3 dying suns dawn, with the Zarnak horde throwing everything they had at base Grizzle 19, like a furious X trying to get back their favorite hoodie. The ground rumbled with the weight of their siege beasts, half of which looked like they'd crawled straight out of a nightmare, and the other half like someone tried to bioengineer an armored blender. Explosions rocked the already mangled compound. Acid geysers tore through shipping crate walls, and the air was thick with smoke, ozone, and the unmistakable scent of instant noodles on fire. Yet against this insectoid apocalypse, the humans stood, wounded, bandaged, ridiculous. Sergeant Ia. Jenna Briggs had somehow upgraded her look from bleeding war criminal to post-apocalyptic motivational speaker. She was now down to 1 functioning leg, 3 working fingers, and a cracked visor duct-taped to her face. Her armor had so many scorch marks it resembled modern art, and she was sporting a plasma burn across her side that very clearly resembled a cartoon duck. "I am not dying today," she growled as she limped to the front line, dragging a reprogrammed Zarnak turret with the determination of someone who once wrestled a bear for a parking spot. "I still have a punch card for the Galactic Mess Hall, and it's only got 9 holes." Around her, human soldiers formed a perimeter of chaotic resilience, propped up on crutches, wheelchairs, and pure spite. They had mounted blasters to IV poles, turned medical trays into throwing discs, and reloaded their weapons using muscle memory and blind optimism. The final line was drawn with neon glow sticks and stolen surgical lasers. No one questioned it. Dr. Zira Noor, once a model of galactic composure, now looked like a caffeine-fueled emergency deity. Lab coat torn, all 6 arms stained with every color of bodily fluid in the spectrum, and eyes wide with equal parts terror and something suspiciously like pride. She no longer bothered with protocols or sterilization. She barked orders like a drill sergeant, slapped combat stims into necks like stickers, and even headbutted a malfunctioning med drone into obedience. Somewhere between injecting a Marine with experimental painkillers and reattaching a foot using alien epoxy, she'd transformed from a surgeon into a war mage. "You there!" she shouted, pointing at a corporal who was using a mop to parry a Zarnak claw. "Don't die unless you've signed the new consent form. It includes experimental regeneration clauses." The Zarnak hit hard, waves of them, clicking and screaming, their armored hides deflecting blaster bolts and their claws tearing through barriers like wet paper. But the humans fought harder, fueled by adrenaline, bad jokes, and whatever bootleg cocktail Zira was pumping into their veins. Gomez, now mostly held together with duct tape and dental floss, was leading a charge on a hover stretcher like a one-man cavalry. Halden was yelling motivational insults while dual-wielding a scalpel and a karaoke mic. And in the middle of it all, Jenna was a one-woman hurricane of defiance, shouting orders between bursts of gunfire and sarcastic quips. "Zira, got any glue left? I think I just stepped on my spleen." "That was not your spleen. That was someone else's pancreas." "Well, it's mine now." The tide began to turn, not because the humans were winning tactically, but because the Zarnak couldn't process what they were seeing. Their war doctrine had no entry for enemy units actively mocking their own injuries. They had no plan for opponents who used cafeteria chairs as shields, nor for the battle chant now being screamed by a half-conscious Marine. If it's still attached, it's operational. When the Horde's second line tried to flank the base, they were met with a wall of wounded lunatics throwing makeshift explosives made of bio-waste, caffeine concentrate, and rage. The Zarnak hesitated, and hesitation was all the opening Jenna needed. With a rallying cry that could have summoned demons, she hurled herself, half-limp, half-possessed, into their command unit, dragging a portable fusion battery wired to a scalpel detonator. The resulting blast was biblical. Not in scale, Zira later measured it at mildly apocalyptic with strong overtones of chaos, but in consequence. The Zarnak command structure collapsed, literally. Their lead war beast pancaked into their communications hive, severing links and sparking panic. Jenna, blown halfway back to the trauma bay, slammed into the wall and slid down like an exclamation point. She blinked. "Hey, Zira, how's my face?" "On fire," Zira gasped, skidding to her side with a stim gun. "Fantastic," Jenna wheezed. "I needed a tan." The remaining Zarnak forces retreated, no organized withdrawal, just panicked skittering. They'd faced plasma cannons, orbital strikes, and neural viruses. But this was something else. This was a species that treated trauma like a punchline and made combat medics question their own existence. Silence fell, broken only by distant coughing. A karaoke machine still sputtering static, and the dull thud of someone falling over and immediately asking for snacks. Zira stared at the scene, blood-soaked, fire-licked, and unbelievably alive. "Medical log, I don't even care what number," she muttered. "The humans survived, somehow, again." Jenna, propped up against a wall with a bandaged stump and a bottle of alien sports drink, gave a half-hearted salute. "Told you. Doc, we don't die, we just regroup uglier." Zira sank to the floor beside her, tossed her ruined clipboard into the flames, and muttered, "I swear by the stars, if I'm ever mortally wounded, do not call a Taxari. Call a human. They'll kill you with non-sterile tools and bad pickup." Lines. But by every god in the spiral arm, you'll live long enough to regret it. And from somewhere in the rubble, someone yelled, "Also, we're out of coffee." The war was over. For now. But the legend of Base Grizzle 19 had only just begun.